this guy. She said, he's fantastic. He's like a firework on stage. He was voted best presenter at the university last year at this conference. So I think we have a lot to look forward to. I decided to do a little research on him first. And what do you do when you research someone? You Google them. And I found his website. And he says he's not your typical academic. Sounds nice. He teaches creativity, innovation. He teaches design thinking. He says he uses multiple hands-on, action-based methods, and he uses laughter in his teaching. And there was this one other little detail. He has a black belt in karate, right?
Long time ago.
Long time ago, but still. So I got to tell you, I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to teach us about innovation. The floor is all yours. Federico Lozano.
Good afternoon. Let's try this again. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Laughter was good, but I also want to get some response. So yes, I am Federico Lozano, or maybe Federico Lozano, right? More appropriate. I am a lecturer in practical entrepreneurship, and I like that title very much, actually. I'm not very big on titles, and I know Scandinavians aren't big on titles either, but the fact that it says practical in my title makes me actually very happy, because it identifies very clearly what I do in my classes. In my class, we try to become as real-world oriented as we can get in a university. So we engage with a lot of different projects. We interact with you guys, the business community. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be here today, because this is the perfect example of an initiative that is bringing in business people, academics, government institutions, putting them together and coming up with something very impactful, in my opinion. So I'm actually really, really happy to be here. I congratulate all of you for being a part of this, and also to the organizers for actually having the vision to create something like this in our beautiful city. So now that you see my title up here, you're probably wondering, design. What does this have to do with building a website or being innovative or coming from a business school professor, right? We should be more focused towards economics and data. And so hopefully towards the end of this presentation, you'll start to understand what angle I usually take when I communicate about innovation and change. So this is the first thing that usually comes to mind when you hear design, right? Kind of like a colorful, right? Very creative person. She's actually an incredibly successful clothing designer, right? And her hair usually matches the background where she stands and her clothing, right? So today I'm kind of matching, so I'm trying my best. Blue hair would be probably pushing it a little too much, right? Or John Galliano. Who's heard of John Galliano? Yeah, oh, very good, exactly. So you guys are more fashionable than my students, because I've asked this before in the university, and there's like 2 or 3 people like, right? So it's incredibly successful designer, but that's not the kind of design that I want to talk to you guys about today. This is another thing that comes up to mind, right? You hear design and maybe interior design. Scandinavians have fantastic interior design, right? And so this is also considered design, but it's not the kind of design that I'm referring to. Although I don't want to bash traditional designers, because this is actually really important, right? Who would like to use that bathroom? So the bathroom here is pretty tight, actually. So I was thinking about this. Maybe I should take a picture of the Rica Hotel bathroom. But this is probably not the best place to take a pee, right? Or what about this for the girls, right? Where's the toilet paper? Right? Not too cool. So this matters, right? But that's not exactly what I want to talk to you about today. Today I want to talk about the specific tools of the designer, not so much the results or the products of the designer. So designers use many tools, and these are the two principal tools I think can be transferred into the business world. And they can start to apply to your perspectives of how am I going to become present online in the most appropriate way possible. So it's empathy and prototyping and feedback. These are kind of the two things designers are constantly involved in. And we'll try to transfer that to our perspective as small business owners interested in building websites and becoming known to the world. So let's start with this really important word, empathize, right? I repeat this over and over and over in my classrooms. People, my students get really tired of hearing this, but I think it's incredibly important. And this is really important. I'm not referring to sympathy, it's empathy, because I believe in Norwegian, sometimes this can be confused. Sympathy is more about feeling maybe sorry for someone, right? It's not a very positive feeling. Empathy is something else. So who wants to shoot out a definition for empathy? Getting into my lecture mode. I cold call. This means that I'm going to actually point at someone. There we go, the mayor. Come on, empathize. What does that mean? To be concerned about? Absolutely, to care, right? Yes, student. Absolutely. Right? So we talk in class about getting into the skin, into the shoes, into the spirit, maybe, of another individual, right? It seems simple, but it's not easy, and it's incredibly important when you're trying to innovate and when you're trying to build your online presence. So I teach through examples, and this is just one example about the value of empathy in a business context. Right, so this story starts in Warsaw, Poland. It's a group of managers from a soft drink and snacks company, and they usually distribute their products in these kind of dispensing machines, which are spread out all across the city. However, the dispensing machines inside of the train stations, they're not doing too well. Right? Sales are flat. So the managers are starting to get worried, right? They're getting pressure from the top saying, hey, you guys have to do something about these vending machines inside of the train stations. Right? They're expensive, we've got inventory in there, you got to distribute it somehow. So they're approaching this problem in multiple ways, usually in very business-like fashions. So checking out prices of the competition, right? Maybe even the positioning of the machine, right? They're doing all this data analysis. And then one of the managers was lucky enough to hear something about design-driven innovation. And one of the speakers of this design-driven innovation talk was saying the same thing I was, basically. And he was saying, try to empathize. And the suggestion to empathy, in this case, was observe. Right? Sounds super simple. A lot of the things that I'm going to say are very self-explanatory. So that's what they did. The managers went to the train station, and they observed. They sat down, and they saw the patterns and the rhythms and the interaction of potential customers with this vending machine, right? And so what was happening? A lot of customers were walking up to the machine, right? You can tell that they were kind of thirsty or maybe hungry, right? So they start sort of jiggling and trying to find some coins, right, to purchase. And so they see, and they're about to put in the coin, and one of the patterns the managers identified was that these people were focusing on the machine, but at the same time, looking back towards the tracks, right? They seem to be worried about something regarding the tracks, and the obvious thing would be, I'm going to miss my train, right? Do I have enough time to purchase this Coca-Cola and at the same time catch my train? And they saw this over and over and over again, and so the managers started to scratch their head, and they said, okay, maybe we can fix this quite simply, right? In a more kind of empathetic and human way. This is what they came up with. They put a clock on the top that essentially counts down the time to when the next train leaves. Right? So people would walk up, they would see, I got 2 minutes to go, right? Gives me plenty of time to purchase my drink, go to the train track, and take my train. Sales tripled with a very simple solution like this. So I talk a lot about the hospital experience because it's the classic place where empathy is very important. Anybody who's been in a hospital for a relatively long period of time can realize that it's probably not a walk in the park, right? You know, oh, I'm in the hospital. Ooh, this is great, right? It sucks, essentially. And so people that work there need to learn how to empathize with their customers, the patients. So this is just one example of a very, very important design and innovation firm in Silicon Valley called IDEO. So they were invited to a hospital in the US, a very large hospital operator, to make the user experience more friendly, right? To empathize more. And so the designers saw this perfect, this is one of the experiences that's going on in the hospital, right? So it's the nurse, right, on one side, the patient laying down, and the patient is about to get a really big needle stuck up his coccyx, right? It's very painful. I've had this done before, and you don't want to be in that situation, right? So this guy is laying there, and the nurse is using this little machine, you can obviously see it there, to check out the data and the vitals of the patient to make sure that the guy's okay, right? He's still breathing, his heart's still beating, everything is moving in the right direction, but there's something else going on in this picture. What's going on here? What do you see that stands out? Exactly, right? So there's this human gesture, a very important human gesture, let me tell you, because when you're in that position, you are freaking out, right? And then when you feel the hand of the nurse, it comforts you. She's essentially saying, through a pat, it's going to be okay. Right? I'm here for you. There's a problem here, however. The machine that she's holding has to be operated with two hands. So the poor nurse is kind of confused, right? She's inputting all the information, patting the patient on the hand, but at the same time trying to use her other hand to manage this apparatus. The designers saw this, and they came up with a very simple solution. An apparatus that does exactly the same thing, but just with one hand. And you scroll it with your thumb. And that completely liberated the left hand of the nurse so she can pat the patient as many times as she wanted to, right? And give that comfort, that human comfort to the patient. So again, very simple solutions, which most of the time you come up with by observing just a little bit more than we usually observe, becoming slightly more aware of the environment. That's the power of design. Now I want to use a Norwegian example, right? So we all know Petter Stordalen, right? Incredibly successful entrepreneur, very wealthy man in Norway. He runs these hotels, which, by the way, I love. I use them all the time. I'm sorry for saying this in a Rica hotel, but I'm very happy with comfort. It's cheap and it works for me, right? Because I travel for work, and it's actually very design-oriented for those of you who've been there. It's very user-friendly. You can check in and check out really quickly. Right? You can tell that they think about the customer. However, I think they slipped somehow in one particular aspect. And it relates to their website, right? So I got onto their website maybe 4 months ago or 5 months ago, and I was about to reserve a room in Oslo, right? And obviously when I logged onto the main website, it was in Norwegian, which a Norwegian company should have its website in Norwegian. That was perfect, right? I started to practice my Norwegian, right? Trying to understand how to reserve this room, and I was kind of struggling a bit, and I was pushing myself because I still need to learn Norwegian, and I was going through the Norwegian process, and then there was a point where I was like, let's just switch languages, right? Because there's this option on the top right-hand corner. Right? I actually looked back to see if my wife wasn't there, because if she saw me cheating on my Norwegian, I would get in trouble, let me tell you. So I changed languages, clicked on the English part, and then suddenly, this came up. Hello? I was like, you want me to do what? I have to admit, I kind of understood, right? I was calling my wife, hey, I understood the message, wife, check it out. Right? But I clicked, and I continued, and I didn't really think about it. You guys were actually quite quick, but I didn't really think about it until I was browsing the English site, and I'm like, wait a second. I just asked this damn machine to change languages, probably because I don't speak Norwegian, right? And the next thing that it does is spits me out another message in Norwegian, right? It's like, who thought about this, right? So then what did I do? Of course, this is time to blog, right? So I went straight to my blog, which we use in my class for discussion purposes. And so I started to write this friendly-ish blog, like saying, hello, guys, like what's going on here? I love your service. I love your hotel. Maybe you should think about your website a little bit longer, right? But then, my wife is always part of my talks. She never comes. That's probably why she never comes, because she knows I always talk about her. So this is my wife, Lynn, right? And so she's like, well, why don't you actually tweet this? And not only tweet it straight to the chairman of the company. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, how can we do that? And she's like, oh, of course, I've got his sort of Twitter name, Peter Sturdalen, and she sends it. And she says, hey, maybe this is something you should consider, right? And obviously I thought, well, this guy's never gonna respond, right? Super, as I mentioned, important man. He's not even gonna think about the feedback that my wife and I have sent him. And so I continue teaching my classes, the day goes on, the weeks turn into months, and maybe right before the month was over, I remembered this. And I thought, well, it would be interesting to see if somebody reacted, because we never got an email, we never got any response from the company, right? And so I go into the company's website, it's in Norwegian, as it should be, I go to check the language, I choose English, and it goes straight into English. No weird message. Right? And so I'm not really sure if it was because of our feedback, but it potentially could have been. So that's just another example of the value of giving, receiving, and really taking seriously people's feedback. And that's a good transition into the second part of my conversation that I want to have with you, which is feedback and prototypes. And essentially, prototypes are the conduit, right, to receiving the feedback, to test your product or your website in this particular case. So now that we're talking about websites, I want to tell you about my website, right? I am absolutely new at this. You're not the only ones, right? I don't know literally anything about building a website 2 months ago. I've been dabbling with it, right? And so here is my personal site, which I've been developing with this software, which lets me modify things as I go, which is fantastic. And so I was very happy about the actual pictures, right? I was very lucky enough to have a professional photographer take these pictures for free. And so I was like, oh, thank you so much. And he asked me, what do you do in your classes? And I essentially said, well, what you're seeing now, right? I move a lot, right? And we do a lot of gestures and we do a lot of exercises and activities. And he's like, perfect. Do your movements, right? And I'll take pictures of you. And so here I am doing my movements, right? And so I use these pictures in my website. That's nothing compared to what we do in class, by the way. And so, yeah, I was happy, right? I was actually very happy with the results. And of course, it's time to tweet to the world that I have a website, and I'm very proud of it, right? And so nervously, because again, it was a prototype, there was a lot of rough edges to it, I sent it out there, and I get this message. I swear to God, I do not make up any of this stuff, because actually a colleague of mine has seen me presenting, he's like, come on, how much of that is really true? And I'm like, everything is true, right? And so this happened, right? She's a really good friend of mine, and she's like, a yoga site? And she's always very ironic, right? So I thought, well, she's joking around, right? And I'm like, yeah, yoga site. And then I'm like, I have to come up with something smart, right, to respond. And it's like, what should I say? And this is what I said, right? Yeah, a yoga site for the right side of the brain, which is the side of the brain we use to be creative, right? I'm like, yeah, we're stretching our brain in my classes, and perfect up to there, right? And I thought that was going to be the end of the conversation, right? Maria would laugh and continue her work. Not really. She's like, Lozano Fede, that side of yours is most definitely related to yoga. And I'm like, what is she talking? I started getting a little bit worried, kind of scratched my head. I went back into my federicolozano.com, looked at it, and I'm like, everything is working fine. Like, I've got some crazy pictures, but I don't know what she's really referring to the yoga thing, right? I think that's pushing a little bit too much. Life continued, as always, right? The weeks turned into months. Actually, this was only a week and a half past, and I was relaxing, right? Feeling very proud of my website, chilling in Norway, and then suddenly I get a phone call, right? And it's a phone call from my mother, right, in Mexico, which I usually don't get because we plan calls on Skype. So she called, and they're aging, and so I got a little bit worried, right? Are you okay, Mom? I got a little freaked out. And she's like, son? And I'm like, yes, Mom? Right? Have you gone crazy? We have mental illness in the family, actually, so she probably was a bit worried about me, right? And I'm like, not that I know of. I'm still around here. I'm not in jail in Norway, right? Things are working out well. And she's like, are you really opening up a yoga institute? And I'm like, she had to have spoken with Maria, right? But they don't know each other, right? And so I thought really quick, and my first reaction was like, shit, right? What are they talking about? And so I started getting really nervous, right? Because my site was out there, and for some reason it related to yoga, which I've done once, and I was like falling all over the place, right? And very strange. And then I thought, this could be a reason, right? My mom usually checks the internet on her smartphone, right? And I remember Maria, when she sends me emails, it always says, sent from my iPod or my iPad. And I'm like, well, these two people, something that relates to them is that they both access the internet via mobile device. And I remember, and I started to get kind of an inkling of a memory that when I was playing around with my software, right, there were two options. There was computer option, and then there was a mobile device option. And there was a template inside of that mobile device option. And then it hit me. I remember watching these two people sitting down, meditating. That was the template. And it was still up there, right? Literally this site, right? And so I'm like, oh no! And so I call a friend, I'm like, do you have your mobile device in front of you? Yes. Go into my site. Yes, he goes in there. I'm like, what do you see? Some dude's meditating, bro. I was like, wow, what a disaster, right? And so I went straight into the software, figured it out, changed it, put up my normal yoga site, right? My yoga site, and continued with life happily. So be really receptive to the feedback that you get, right? Because sometimes you hear feedback, like the feedback that I heard from Maria, and you're like, that's ridiculous, right? Sometimes feedback is ridiculous, by the way, right? So it doesn't mean you have to do everything that your customers tell you to. But be careful with that critical piece of feedback, like this one. So now I want to wrap up this conversation and my talk with an example that I love very much because it's something that I did with my students. So I absolutely adore my students. That's all I think about, right? This is my life, and this is Joanna and Mohammed, right? And we're at Lingen at the MIT Fab Lab. Who's been there, by the way? Okay. So this is a place I really suggest that you visit. It's a fantastic place to prototype, right? And to be creative and to innovate. And so essentially we were here visiting, prototyping, right? And so Joanna, Mohammed, and I started to prototype a package for this product. Where's Haiti? There she is. So Olivita is a product founded at the University of Tromsø. I'm very proud of it, right? It's a fantastic omega-3 product, and they promote it as the Rolls-Royce of omega-3 products, right? And so we were really nervous about this challenge, right? And so we started to think about how can we innovate on the package, and we start with a very rough prototype, because that's how prototypes should be. I'm starting to get already laughs. You shouldn't laugh about this. I'm actually very proud of it. But the idea was they had heart, right? Because Olivita has a heart. It's very good for your circulation, etc. Right? So that made sense to us. We felt pretty clever about that. Right? Then you put it inside of the box, and you can still see the logo. And so we were loving it, right? And so if we implement the design thinker's perspective, you start to ask people, right? And so we started to elicit a lot of feedback, right? And we would walk around this place, talk to students and people who were hanging out there, skiers. What do you think about this? Some of them looked at it, and in general, they liked it. So we were feeling pretty motivated about our prototype. It's pretty cool, right? Maybe you can play around with the colors, and this went on, right? Then there was a group of Norwegian students, like a pretty big crowd, like 7 Norwegian students in the corner. And so Mohammed, Joanna, and I, the foreigners, walk up to the Norwegian students like, so, can we get your feedback really quick? And the Norwegians are like, sure, and they grab it, and they look at it. And then some of them start to giggle, right? And they start to whisper to each other like, and Joanna and Mohammed and I are like, what's going on here? Like, why are they giggling? Like, So we asked him, can you tell us what do you see here? And then more giggling, right? And so this went on for a while, and then I started to scratch my head, and I realized that it was only Norwegians, and we were all foreign people, and so I said, there must be some kind of cultural gap here, right? Hell yeah, there was a cultural gap. Right? People are nodding back there. If it was obvious, it looked like an to-do, right? The Rolls Royce of Omega-3 in your to-do. Doesn't make any sense. Could be offensive. And so we tried to sort of feel as comfortable as possible about our failure. We pushed it aside, and we went on, right? And we developed another prototype. So there you're getting kind of the sense of why it's so important not to worry about getting potentially negative feedback. The earlier you get it, the earlier you fail, the sooner you will succeed. It's kind of logical, right? Kind of. The more you think about it, the more you'll realize that you can do this in any part of your life. Fail early to succeed sooner. This is one of my mantras. So if you're wondering, how can I learn more about this? This sounds really relatively interesting, right? Maybe I want to do some yoga while I learn innovation. We just founded a lab for design thinkers. Ulatsimir, my former student, and I, where is he? Back there. We're really excited about this, actually. And we're launching it tomorrow. And you're all invited. The more, the better. This is a place where business people, academics, students, government can sit down and start to have conversations and start to do things about these conversations. We're going to have material to prototype, right? We're going to do workshops for free. All this is open to the public, by the way. And so this would be the perfect place for you guys to actually sit down and think about, how can I make the best, most empathic, most empathetic website possible that fulfills all the specific needs of my customers? So you're more than welcome to come to this event. So to wrap up, I can tell that I'm being sort of rushed here. So empathize deeply. That's number one, the most important thing. Think about the human. Number two, seek feedback. Don't worry about what will come. You'll do something about it later. Be open and get out there. Receive that feedback. Third, visit us at the lab. Please. And if you do all this, I assure you, you'll become fantastic human-centered innovators. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Federico. This was most inspiring. I'm sure we will learn a lot. We have a little something for you here. It's from one of the businesses that we have worked with so far. It's superb chocolate.
Thank you very much.
Nästa taler ut är